I figured I'd make a deck tech on Twiddlestorm. I've noticed that not many people are really making any content for Twiddlestorm at all, so I figured I'd start with a deck tech, go into a couple of tournaments on Cockatrice that I am participating in, and then eventually, once I get a new computer, I'll grind some Mitgo leagues and see what happens. Okay, so let's get started. This is a deck tech for Twiddlestorm, a modern deck that was more or less birthed with the printing of Lotus Field in M20. Now, this deck had been kind of floundering around before then as a tier 3, maybe tier 4 deck that used cards like Utopia Sprawl to enchant lands so that those lands would tap for multiple mana. This Lotus Field neatly resolves all of those crappy cards into a single, actually pretty strong card. So this deck uses Lotus Field, of course, which can tap for 3 mana of any one color. In combination with Twiddle, it allows Twiddle to essentially function as a dark ritual. You tap Lotus Field for 3, cast Twiddle, you untap that Lotus Field, and now you are up 2 blue mana. This particular build of Twiddlestorm is Arcane without Wishclaw Talisman. So Arcane Twiddlestorm abuses Psychic Puppetry as a second engine piece. This Psychic Puppetry will essentially allow your arcane spells to, at worst, not cost any mana, and at best, net mana when you cast them. I'll go ahead and showcase how this puppetry works in a second. No, that's not the button I wanted to hit. So, let's start with our standard combo here, which is simply just having a Lotus Field in play, being able to tap it for a couple of blue, well, 3 blue, in fact, and then casting Twiddle, which will allow us to untap that Lotus Field. Again, showcasing what I said earlier, we've got this Lotus Field untapped, but now we also have 2 blue mana floating in our pool. Now let's also suppose that we've got Psychic Puppetry and some arcane spells in our hand. So, instead of casting Psychic Puppetry, what we do is we reveal it from our hand. We tap Lotus Field for 3 blue mana, and then we can cast an arcane spell from our hand, and for example this Ideas Unbound. Then we pay an additional blue mana to splice Psychic Puppetry onto Ideas Unbound. This essentially makes Ideas Unbound say, draw 3 cards, discard 3 cards at end of turn, tap or untap target permanent, which we will use that Lotus Field as the target permanent, of course. So let's go ahead and do what Ideas Unbound says. Draw 3 cards, untap target permanent, and of course we'll discard those at end of turn, but ideally we'll never hit the end of turn. So we can see that we've drawn 3 cards, we still have the exact same amount of mana in our mana pool, and our Lotus Field is untapped, so we essentially just drew 3 cards for free. Now let's go ahead and tap Lotus Field for some more mana, and let's keep this combo going. Pay 3 mana, draw 3 cards, discard 3 cards, untap Lotus Field. And you can see how this can get out of hand quite quickly. Alright, so this is essentially the strength of the deck, is that you get to draw cards for free. You can even do something like splice Psychic Puppetry onto a Peer Through Depths, which will allow you to dig 5 cards. And in this example, I think I've got a Merchant Scroll. And you can untap Lotus Field, which allows you to cast that spell for free. Another way you can use this is by splicing it onto Reach Through Depths. Notice I tap Lotus Field for 3 blue mana, but I only spend 2 blue mana. So I'll draw a card, and I will untap Lotus Field. So the true strength of this deck is the engine. Lotus Field is exceedingly difficult to interact with. your opponent will have to prevent you from landing Lotus Field by destroying your lands, because once you land Lotus Field, really the only thing that can affect it is Smallpox. It's got hexproof, which means it is immune to your Assassin's Trophies, your Field of Ruins, your pillages, all of that. The second part of the engine is, of course, Psychic Puppetry. Notice that I didn't cast Psychic Puppetry at all during that entire combo. It sat in my hand only to be revealed multiple times. This means that it's not particularly vulnerable to counterspells. Your opponent could counter your Reach Through Mist, sure, or your Twiddle, or your Ideas Unbound if they really wanted to, but they would only be countering the fuel piece. The actual engine piece stays in hand and is not really vulnerable to anything except for an Inquisition or a Thoughtseize or perhaps a Vendilion Click. In addition, Psychic Puppetry is actually pretty unassuming. Most people will see Ideas Unbound, see the text, draw 3 cards, and be like, oh, I gotta take that. When really, Ideas isn't particularly strong in this deck. So, in comparison to Gift Storm, which is, of course, the sister deck for this one, I would presume that this deck is possibly a bit stronger. It's certainly slower, I would say. I only get turn 3 wins with this deck maybe 20% of the games that I play. Meanwhile, with Gift Storm, I'm sure that percentage is higher, especially if you're not able to interact. But the problem, of course, is that interaction. If someone kills your Mana Dork in Gift Storm, then you've got to wait a few turns before you're able to find another Dork. Maybe they would have another Dork right away, but still. If your card in Twiddle Storm gets countered, you still have your Lotus Field in play and your Psychic Puppetry in hand. Countering a spell in Twiddle Storm is not going to impact your engine, because your engine simply is immune to counter spells. It's immune to all forms of permanent removal. And it's really only vulnerable to Inquisition on exactly Psychic Puppetry. Other than that, you can just try again next turn with another fuel piece. So, now that we've gone over the basics of how the deck functions, let's go ahead and set up some sample hands. Alright, so here's an example of a good hand. Not sure why that's not rendering, but this is Dream's Grip. Why is that not rendering? Oh well, there it is. Okay, so this is a sample hand. It's pretty decent, actually. It's got the Psychic Puppetry already in hand. We've got 2 Arcane cards in hand. We've got that Twiddle, and we've got a Dream's Grip. Normally, you'd only need one or the other, but it could come in handy. We've only got 1 land, though, but we do have a Serum Vision, so I think it's worth the risk. Really, what we need with this hand is we need another land, and we need a Lotus Field. After we've got that, we're off to the races. Alright, so let's go ahead and cast that Serum Visions. I'll draw a card, scry 2. There's that second land. Alright, I'll scry this Sleight of Hand to top, put that on bottom. Okay, second turn. Let's see if we can find something good with this Sleight of Hand. Found an Ideas Unbound and an Echoing Truth. Now, in this sort of situation, it really would depend on what the board state is like. If you're fighting against any sort of control or long-going deck, I might recommend the Ideas Unbound. If you're fighting any sort of aggro deck, I might recommend the Echoing Truth. I'll go ahead and take the Echoing Truth, just in case. And here's where we have a real problem. I'm out of cantrips, except for this Reach Through Mist, which really isn't that great. But what we can do instead is we can use these cards defensively. Let's say that our opponent has cast a Tarmogoyf, and it's a big boy. And in this particular case, I'm just going to pass turn here. My opponent will take their turn. We're going to go to the beginning of combat, but I'm going to use these cards defensively in order to buy myself some time. So, What are we going to do here? We're going to cast Reach Through Miss. We're going to splice on Psychic Puppetry. Just like that. I'm going to draw a card. I'm going to tap down their Tarmogoyf. This is the true power of the deck, is that it does not need to combo immediately. Every piece in the deck, with the exception of Past in Flames, I suppose, can be used defensively. Alright, let's go ahead and start our turn. Look at that. We've bought ourselves a bit of time by using defensive cards. We can now go off to the races using our Lotus Field and a bunch of other stuff. This Past in Flames in hand is going to allow us to recast all of our spells from the graveyard, which, by the way, will still function splicing Psychic Puppetry on, since Puppetry doesn't care where the card is cast from, it only cares that Puppetry itself is revealed from your hand. From here, we can dig through our deck and fire off a Grape Shot. I'll go ahead and run you through a sample of how this might work out. So, we start by tapping all of our lands for 2 blue mana. We then play a Lotus Field, which requires us to sacrifice 2 lands when it enters. That's fine. Now we play Twiddle. I'm going to keep track of the storm count here at the bottom left. We'll untap Lotus Fields, and we'll tap it for 3 blue mana, cast Dream's Grip, and untap it again. So, at this point in the combo, my goal is to resolve Past in Flames. If I'm going to do that, then I need to have access to 5 mana. 4 mana for casting Past in Flames, and 1 mana for flashing back Twiddle or Dream's Grip to untap Lotus Field and start the combo again. As long as I keep that 5 mana available, then I should be fine. So, I have 2 blue mana floating now that this Serum Visions is on the stack, but I have access to 3 blue mana or 3 red mana from Lotus Field, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'll go ahead and draw a card. Scry 2. I don't like either of those cards. We don't need a second Psychic Puppetry. I'll scry that to the bottom. Alright, so now we can really start firing things off. Let's cast a Peer Through Depths for free. Find another Peer Through Depths. This is fantastic, because all of these Peer Through Depths, later on, once we cast Past in Flames, will begin filling up our hand. Alright, so I found a Merchant Scroll. I'll take a moment and sing the praises of Merchant Scroll here. This card is amazing. It will find your Psychic Puppetry when you do not have Psychic Puppetry. In mid-combo, it will find other cards that will help you out too. So, for example, I have this Dream's Grip in hand. I can tap this for 3 blue mana, cast Dream's Grip, untap Lotus Field, and then cast Merchant Scroll. Notice that I still have that 2 blue floating mana, and I have access to 3 mana from Lotus Field, which is 5 mana, what we need for Past in Flames. So, I can search for any old blue instant that I want, which all of my instants are blue instants. I'm going to find a Peer Through Depths. Doop doop doop. 3 blue mana. Splice on. Now, Merchant Scroll is good for a couple of other things as well. For example, if I didn't have access to that Dream's Grip, then I could just Merchant Scroll for a Dream's Grip, then use that Dream's Grip and still be even on mana. Then when I go to flashback Past in Flames, I have 2 more cards that I can cast in the graveyard. Alright, and we're just going to keep casting a bunch of cards for free. Cast that Ideas Unbound for free. Alright, so at this point in the combo, I really don't have too terribly many options here. I could cast this sleight of hand and hope for something, but I'd really rather not do that. I could just go for the Past in Flames, which I think I will do, actually. Now, there are a couple of advanced maneuvers that I could do here if I really wanted to squeeze all of the value out of this hand and graveyard that I could, but for sake of simplicity, I'll just go ahead, tap Lotus Field for 3 red mana, and then cast Past in Flames. This is my 10th spell, and I now have access to all of these delicious spells that I can recast from the graveyard. Alright, let's go ahead and start with Twiddle. Untap that Lotus Field. And now we're ready to go off again. Let's make a bunch of mana with these Dream's Grips. And just like that, we're back up to 7 mana. Again, we can cast cards from the graveyard while splicing on. So let's go ahead and start with that. Let's cast this Reach Through Miss. Draw 3 cards for free. And at this point in the combo, we can start looking for that lethal Grape Shot. Let's keep going, drawing some more cards. Wow, where is that Grape Shot, huh? Jeez, where is it? This is probably one of the weaknesses of the deck here, is that it just takes so freaking long to combo sometimes. Ah, there we are. And again, that Psychic Puppetry has stayed in my hand the entire turn. Now we can go ahead, tap Lotus Field for 3 red mana. Use 2 of that red on a Grape Shot. 20 total damage. That should be game. Alright, now that I've walked you through the combo here, let's go ahead and set up a couple of other hands. See how I would evaluate them. This hand right here. It's not a bad hand. It's not a bad hand. You don't have any combo pieces here, but you have this Sylvan Scrying. I've got 2 Sylvan Scryings in the deck. Their primary function is, of course, to find that Lotus Field, but their secondary function is to find these lonely sandbars when I already have a Lotus Field. So I'll go ahead and keep this, and we'll attempt to get to a point to where we can combo off. Now, I'm going to start with a Serum Visions. The reason for this is I have the Sylvan Scrying in hand. If I can find any green source, then I can cast that Sylvan Scrying turn 2. So, let's go ahead and try it. That is a red source and a card that I don't really want. I'll go ahead and scry both of those to bottom. Alright, so second turn. Let's cast a couple more cantrips. We're likely not going to be comboing off on the third turn, which is unfortunate. Found that green source. Let's go ahead and fetch up a Breeding Pool. Nice. We found that Psychic Puppetry that we need. Okay. Now in this instance, definitely cast that Sylvan Scrying. Let's find that Lotus Field, put it into our hand. Now, under normal circumstances, we would be able to just play Lotus Field, sacrifice these 2 lands, and be off to the races. But we don't have any mana floating, so we can't use this Dream Script. Instead, we'll have to wait till the next turn. Turn 4. Now, turn 4, assuming we haven't been disrupted, of course, which is highly unlikely, we have a fantastic hand here. We've got that Psychic Puppetry, and we have 4 different fuel cards to use with it. We're going to be able to draw 4 cards and then dig 10 cards. That is highly likely to find us the combination of cards that we need to fire off a Past in Flames and continue with the combo. Let's go ahead and try a new hand. This hand is much different than the first hand. The first hand, we had to do a lot of setting up in order to find our engine pieces, although we had plenty of fuel. This hand, we have all of our engine pieces already in hand. We even have a spare Sylvan Scrying, but we don't have any fuel of any kind. So this hand, I would recommend taking it a bit slow, especially with that Is It Charm. It's going to buy us a ton of time. Let's go ahead and fetch up a Breeding Pool and cast a Serum Visions. Draw a card. Oh, there's a fuel piece. Should I keep the Serum Visions or no? I don't have a Dream Script, which means I can't go turn 3 Dream Script, use my remaining floating mana to cast that Serum Vision. So I think I'm going to put both of those to the bottom and hope for something better. Second turn. Now this is an interesting conundrum. We've got a couple of different options here. I don't think that we should cast Sylvan Scrying because we already have the Lotus Field and we have a Lonely Sandbar in hand anyway. But what we can do is we can hold up interaction. This Is It Charm is going to really help out if our opponent casts something like, I don't know, something nasty that we don't want to resolve. Perhaps in this situation, if our opponent was trying to cast a Karn Liberated, we would definitely want to Is It Charm that, because they're just going to go and neg-3, hit our Breeding Pool, and we will be behind on lands for the rest of the game. But let's... And also, if we're fighting an aggro deck, then let's go ahead and use this fancy Tarmogoyf. Let's say they go to try and attack us. An option available to us, if we really wanted to, is we could fetch up... let's fetch up a Steam Vents, so we can play that Is It Charm if we want to. And then we can use our Psychic Puppetry defensively. Splice Psychic Puppetry onto Reach Through Miss, draw a card, tap down their Tarmogoyf. Psychic Puppetry stays in our hand so that we can use it with an arcane spell in the future. Alright, here we go. Again, this hand doesn't have much fuel, so it's probably best to take it nice and slow. Alright, our opponent will untap. They'll go to combats. There's not really much we can do here. I would say cycle a Lonely Sandbar just to see what we get. Okay. This is enough. If we're able to survive this turn, which hopefully we were able to since we tapped down an attacker last turn, then we're going to go ahead and I say cast that Is It Charm. The great thing about Is It Charm is it kills creatures, it counters non-creature spells, and worst case scenario, you can loot with it. Let's go ahead and draw 2, discard 2. Let's discard these 2 because we don't really need them. Awesome. We're all set. We've got the capacity to draw 5 cards this turn. Let's go ahead and see if that works out. Tap for 2 blue mana, play that Lotus Field, and we're going to go ahead and attempt a turn 4 combo. Now that turn 4 combo did come with a tiny bit of disruption in the form of tapping a permanent. That permanent could have been a Tron land. You could have tapped down an Urza's Tower before your opponent got to 3 Tron lands so that you could fade a Karn that way. That permanent could have been this poor Tarmogoyf that wouldn't have been able to attack and potentially deal lethal on the previous turn since it was tapped down the turn before. It could have been your opponent's only blue source, or red source, or black source, so that you can deny them the mana to cast, whatever nasty that they wanted to cast. Let's go ahead and lead off with a Reach Through Miss with Puppetry spliced on. We're going to see if we can get to a good point in the combo. Now here, we've got two Twiddle effects, and we have the capacity to draw 4 more cards. So I think I'm going to tap this for 3 blue mana, cycle this Lonely Sandbar. Ooh, that's not good. Tap that for another blue mana. It's possible we may have to fizzle this turn. Yep. Highly possible. Highly, highly possible. Okay, well, let's see if we can make something out of this. Let's go ahead and try twiddling here. Then we'll cast this Merchant Scroll. Search our deck for a blue instant, in this case a Peer Through Depths. Now I'm not going to fire off this Dream's Grip quite yet because I cast this Ideas Unbound, which I might have to just discard a bunch of cards at end of turn. Let's go ahead and try this. See if we can find something. Oh! There's Past in Flames. And at this point, we're going to be doing very well. I'll just fire off a bunch more spells. We have the capacity to draw 1, 2, 5, 6, 8 if you count Is It Charm, and then of course Emergent Scroll for another Peer Through Depths. Alright, so I hope you've had a bit of a chance to see how we might set up the combo. It's really a combination of proactive setting up as well as reactive tapping opponents, lands, creatures, what have you. It really depends on what cards you have in hand and what your opponent has been able to cast so far. Alright, so let's get started with sideboarding. I've got 5 example decks we can attempt sideboarding against. First deck, Red Prowess. Specifically with the companion, Luris, I think. So I've got a few different tools to deal with Red Prowess in my sideboard. The first is Thing in the Ice. Thing in the Ice is an amazing speed bump. This thing will gain you life. Your opponent will have to use a bolt on it, and then you can use it to block creatures. You can gain a pretty appreciable amount of life with this thing, actually. And that's just the floor usage. Ceiling usage, you put Thing in the Ice in your deck, you put a couple of bolts in your deck, put the spare Echoing Truth in, and then you can use a plan B, taking out that Sylvan Scrying, taking out that Ideas Unbound, taking out a couple of other cards. Let's take out 2 Sleight of Hands and a Twiddle. Now your defense is a plan B. You can play Thing in the Ice, you can use your spells to tap down opposing attackers, and then eventually cast a Sleight of Hand or something, which will flip Thing in the Ice, bounce their board, and then you can start attacking and using your tap offense offensively. You can tap down opposing blockers and just continue swinging with this thing until your opponent is very dead. The benefit to this plan B, and all plan Bs that this deck has, is that they do not rely on Lotus Field. If you can't find Lotus Field, oh well, you just can't find Lotus Field. It happens. Of course, I cited in this Echoing Truth because it's great at stalling, and these Lightning Bolts because they're great at killing things. Alright, so let's try versus Tron. Versus Tron, you want to be as focused as you can be, as well as versus any big mana deck, really. These decks are typically going to be a bit slower than you, so it's going to be easier for you to manage it. In this sort of situation versus Tron specifically, I might recommend... Let's bring in this Void Snare just in case. Let's bring in this Echoing Truth and Ad Nauseam. Ad Nauseam is a fantastic card against any deck that is not directly pressuring your life total. It's just going to function as a third Past in Flames, essentially, except it's one that doesn't use the graveyard. You can put yourself down to 5 life if you like, continue just drawing a bunch of cards, and then win with what you have in hand. Void Snare is great for any problematic permanent that Tron might try to put in. It's not exactly my favorite card. It's more of a flex sideboard slot. I might use a companion if companions are any better. But then again, that would kind of defeat the purpose of this being a not companion deck, and I'm very stubborn. So Void Snare it is for now. And of course that Echoing Truth. Now, against Tron specifically, Izzet Charm is going to be crucial because it's the only counter magic that I have in the main deck. I could bring in the Swan Song, but it's not really going to hit much. Tron is mostly a buy anyway. They have very little ways of interacting with you. You laugh at Ulamog because they cast Ulamog, they exile potentially even their own permanents, because if you only have Lotus Field in play, then all of your stuff is hexproof. And you can just tap Ulamog with Twiddle if you want to. Karn is probably the biggest threat if it lands on turn 3 specifically and you do not have a Lotus Field in play by then. But things like Ugin, Walking Ballista, and what's that other one? Wormcoil Engine and Oblivion Stone. We really just don't care about any of that. Alright, so let's try against Ad Nauseam, which, hilariously enough, you bring in Ad Nauseam against Ad Nauseam. This is a particular situation in which Aria of Flame is quite handy. Ad Nauseam does have ways to disrupt your game plan, forcing them to waste counter spells on an Aria of Flame instead of something that you actually want to resolve. Is a great way to thin their resources. They have only so many Pact of Negations, and it takes a lot out of them to play a Pact of Negation. You'll also want to bring in your Swan Song and probably your Veil of Summers because, of course, Veil of Summer is just amazing. In this particular situation, not really sure what I would take out. Might start with a couple of Sylvan Scrines, because again we have that Aria for a plan B, and then just trim a bunch of other stuff as I see fit. Probably might go with something like this for Ad Nauseam. I might be wrong. I'll probably change it when I actually play against the deck and see how I feel about it. Ad Nauseam is... it's not exactly a buy, but it's not exactly terribly difficult either. You typically are a bit faster and a bit more consistent than them, so as long as you win the die roll, you probably should be fine. Okay, let's try against Jund. Jund is another area where Aria of Flame comes in really handy. So definitely side them in against Jund. Jund, especially now that they've gotten rid of Liliana of the Veil in favor of Kroxa? I don't know. And Luris, means that they rely a lot more on grindy recursion of permanents specifically, and they're going to be siding out all of their Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay, Maelstrom Pulse, all that good stuff that will get rid of these Aria of Flames. This will completely sidestep all of the hate that they bring in against you. Their Scavenging Oozes, their Nihil Spellbombs, all of that stuff, Aria of Flame doesn't care about it. They can discard your entire hand as long as you have Aria of Flame in play. Just cantrip for days. It's fine. I might also recommend Veil of Summer. Depends. I'll side them in just in case. You might want to bring in Lightning Bolts and Thing in the Ice, depending. It really is just based off of how you feel in the moment. And also if they do still have Liliana of the Veil. If they have Liliana of the Veil, don't bring in Thing of the Ice. Just don't do it. It feels real bad. So in this situation, I don't know. Veil of Summer might not actually be that good. Sure, it hits a discard spell, but it probably depends on if you're on the play or the draw. If you're on the play, I might recommend bringing in Veil of Summers. Maybe just have one. I don't know, man. Ain't that deep. Take out your Sylvan Scryings, because again, your plan B doesn't really depend on Lotus Field. and then take out anything that's not going to have a lot of value. I might take out a Twiddle. Oh, got a spare slot. Might as well insert a Veil of Summer. Yeah, I might go something like this. Against Jund, you really want to maximize the amount of cantrips that you have. And then finally, versus Bant Snowblade. So this is probably as close to a hard control deck as we can get in this meta. Really, game one, they're just doing so much weird, irrelevant dirtling that it doesn't even really matter. Just don't let them get to their precious cryptic command mana and you should be fine. This matchup is really more about how to tax your opponent's resources and knowing when to make them have it, as opposed to knowing when to bait counterspells, than it is about actual cards. That being said, depending on the build, you'll probably want to bring in at least Aria of Flame, potentially even Thing in the Ice maybe, but definitely Veil of Summer is going to be amazing for you here. Maybe even Ad Nauseam, I don't know. So, a bit about when to combo. Most of the time, it's going to be pretty obvious when to combo. When you're facing lethal next turn, you'll want to try to combo. Against control decks, it's not really so obvious. You're going to have a bit of back and forth with you attempting to tax resources and them attempting to not have their resources taxed. It'll a lot depend on whether they have an Uro in play or not. It's not really the sort of thing that I can cover in a deck tech. Again, I will be uploading some replays of tournaments that I've been going through, and I'll talk more about my decisions then. So, that should be it for this thing. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. And